Notice that the consequences that are heading towards the United States, towards Russia, could be tremendous. We're talking about the United States considering suffocating the Russian economy in the next 7 days. Now, the probability is not that the economy will collapse in 7 days. And no, but rather that after 7 days, the process of suffocating the Russian economy would begin, led by Donald Trump, the President of the United States. What do they mean by this idea of suffocation? Well, actually, here we're talking about the strategy of secondary sanctions. Not sanctions directly against Russia, but against those around it. That is, countries like China, India, but also countries like Brazil, Turkey, Taiwan, even some that are friends or partners of the United States. The economic punishments are not aimed directly at Russia, but at third countries, and they matter a lot because they take crude oil, buy crude oil, and take it to their countries at a cheap price. But that generates a big economic boost for Russia. Donald Trump says that if the war doesn't stop, then they will have sanctions on another level. In other words, putting Vladimir Putin in check so that he can't sustain the war, because economically it won't be possible. What's happening right now is that the impact would turn against India, which, by the way, is the main buyer of Russian crude oil, with 35% of its imports. China has also been warned by the United States of severe sanctions if it continues to buy Russian crude oil. It buys about 47% of Russia's total production. Just imagine, almost half. But the impacts could also be for Singapore, Taiwan, Brazil, Turkey, among other countries, which have also bought oil and continue to buy oil and gas from the Russians. These derivatives, not just oil but oil derivatives, could create pressure to stop the war. The direct effect would be that there would be a decrease in buyers like India and a drop in oil prices. By the way, this also causes, on the other hand, an increase in the price of oil worldwide. If suddenly China, Turkey, and India say, okay, that's fine. I won't buy from Russia anymore. Let me start buying from Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. Here, there, over there, over there. They start buying from other countries, so strong buyers enter the market and then the price goes up, right? So if the price of oil goes up, the price of gasoline, gas, and so on also goes up. And therefore the price of products. So inflation will hit the market. That's an inflation caused by the attempt to suffocate a country. Economically speaking, right? So it's not a small thing, and it also has important effects, right? I mean, positive in the sense that it could stop a war, maybe, but also negative in that it could create a negative economic effect worldwide. That's an open possibility if big buyers like India and China pull out. A reduction of 10 to 20% of Russian crude could raise Brent by $6 to $11 per barrel. That is practically double. Therefore, everything related to transportation. Transportation of what? Well, of any product. And when transportation costs go up, the product price goes up too. So that's where potential inflation comes from. Beware, oil-producing countries would be most affected by that issue. In that case, they receive, by the way, more resources, but they also generate, let's say, an inflationary effect on the price. On the other hand, a series of strange cases are also being reported within Germany, which are already starting to be investigated and analyzed by the German security forces. What we're seeing there are the affected train tracks. Several train tracks have already been hit in Russia in the last 48 hours. Vandalism, sabotage. What's going on? Germany faces the second arson attack in less than 48 hours. Against the railway lines, the busiest ones are Düsseldorf and Duisburg. Those two have been hit, the busiest ones. The incident was described as vandalism. German authorities believe the incident was due to vandalism by gangs, though I have my doubts about that explanation. They warned of serious disruptions at least until next Saturday morning, right? In response to these attacks, the first one occurred on Thursday, impacting a cable conduit. The second was discovered on Friday, 1.8 kilometers north of the first one in Angermund. The German police said the following: "We assume that both attacks were carried out at the same time, suggesting that this was a planned action. The incendiary devices used in both incidents were of the same type." In other words, this is clearly something coordinated. There were also reports of lines at the central stations because there was no service or it was slower. Meanwhile, as the situation is being resolved, What remains in doubt, at least for many, is whether this is some kind of disruption caused by a foreign country. In other words, sabotage. The police suspect and do not rule out that it could be sabotage, and investigations are intensifying in the affected area. It's unclear if there are any suspects yet, but there likely will be soon. For now, let's discuss other important topics. The number of people who have died after the Russian attack with drones and missiles against Ukraine has risen to 31. There are reports of buildings that are heavily destroyed, severely affected. This comes after a series of strong severe attacks on capital areas. These are happening both in the capital and in other surrounding regions. They say the offensive by Russia has been having a very strong impact on civilian areas. The previous number was 16 dead, and it was updated after people and bodies were being rescued from the buildings. The deaths include a 2-year-old child and members of several families. Additionally, 150 people are reported to remain injured. The attack was one of the harshest in these recent offensives, with many drones and missiles. That's also part of what draws attention today. On the other hand, moving on to other important topics, unemployment, pay attention to this. Unemployment increased slightly, but it did increase. In other words, unemployment in the United States is rising. It reached 4.2% in July, with a low job creation rate, meaning very few jobs were created. We'll talk about the numbers and how things are going in a bit. We'll discuss the details, but for now, it's a problem. But first, let's discuss several economic matters before moving on to other geopolitical issues. The S&P 500 has been experiencing a significant and prolonged drop over the past several days. Initially, it appeared to be a correction, but as it continues to fall, it seems to be more than just that. Now, Interestingly, the banks that analysts started talking about, they started saying that things are going very well. The S&P 500, that the S&P is going to start going up. 500, that you should put money into the S&P 500 because everything is going to go up. What happens next? It starts going down. What does this mean? You have to know how to read the reports from these banks and funds. When they're saying they're going to go up, most likely they're not going to go up. What they do is create the expectation that prices will go up because they're about to sell and the price is going to drop. So they create this effect like, no, we think it's going to go up. The expectation is very positive. Here comes the move. So they said this a few days ago. The comment was strange, but now you can see why they were saying it. I mean, it was strange. It's at a historic high, way up there. It could keep going up, but it was strange, right? Wasn't it odd? As the S&P 500 declines, you can observe the drop, and when it falls, other things fall too, correct? I mean, Bitcoin is also dropping after an excellent performance, but right now it's dropping, at this moment. That's also part of what's happening. The Nasdaq, by the way, has had some impressive rises. I mean, check out the increases. Here, it's really just a very slight correction. Some impressive rises. Well, those are the tech companies, the technological companies. They're doing great now, despite starting the year differently. Let's discuss other significant global events. Well, to begin with, it's already being warned. How? Well, this confidence that Mexico has in the face of tariff reactions is starting to become more solid. We're starting to see how, despite 1,000 things and 1,000 problems, the issue of tariffs is being reversed. This, could be important, especially when it comes to the investments that could come into the country, right? We'll see about this. Let's hope for a good reaction. Right now, the markets, that's the Mexican Stock Exchange, are not at 100%. Although I also say we just had a big rise that started back in the month of... From December 2024, the stock exchange started going up, but now it has been going down. This is also because of the tariffs issue and what that could cause in that regard. Period. Either way, the Mexican peso has stayed strong against the dollar. 1890. Right now, the dollar is recovering a little bit, but it's still far from the price it once reached, almost 22 pesos. So, that's also an important part of what's happening in the world. Let's move on to what's happening in other pretty serious cases around the world.